Conducting business between the East and West is tricky because, unlike for their economic differences, there is no rational explanation for their cultural differences. Right?
Wrong. In this video, we will show you, accompanied by entertaining drawings, that behind such mysterious and confusing cultural differences between the East and West, there are very good reasons for such differences. Where shall we start? How about with our favorite activity, eating? Have you ever noticed the difference between Americans and Chinese when they go out to eat? Well, we are not referring to using chopsticks instead of forks and knives. Take a look at the following scene, as explained by a Chinese businessman.
After a day-long meeting in New York, we, a group of Chinese business people, went to a restaurant for dinner. It was fun.
Together or separate checks?
The waitress asked us when we had almost completed our meal. Together! One of the guests shouted. This was followed by a huge argument over who would pay the tab. But if you think that we were trying to get someone else to pay, then you are wrong. We were each competing to be the one to pay the bill.
Why do Chinese always compete to pay the tab, whereas most Americans ask for separate checks when a group goes out to eat together? Does this mean that Chinese are typically more generous than Americans? There are many such similar puzzles about the East and West. For example, why do strangers usually smile or nod at one another when they pass each other on the streets in America, whereas unrelated people in China usually do not acknowledge one another's existence when they pass each other along China's narrow alleyways? Does this mean that Americans are friendlier than Chinese? At some intersections in China, both traffic police and automatic traffic lights are directing the traffic. Why is this the case? Surprisingly, the two seem to always display contradictory traffic signals. Which one do you follow?
The answer may seem strange. Because Americans follow rules and Chinese rely on relations to conduct business.
How can that be?
Most readers will find this answer difficult to understand. Let us first take a look at how the East and West conduct business.
When conducting business, Westerners tend to follow public rules, such as the law, government regulations, and public information. They rely on formal contracts, legal courts, and lawyers and accountants to carry out transactions and protect their interests. We call this a rule-based governance system.
In contrast, Asians, especially Chinese, primarily rely on personal relationships to conduct business. Contracts are informal and often unwritten. Disputes are settled privately. Public information is not regarded as trustworthy, and rumors may often have some credibility. We call this relation-based governance.
To protect one's business interests in a relation-based society, such as that in China, one must make sure to have all of the following three mechanisms.
First, ex-ante monitoring. Before entering into a relationship with a prospective partner, check out his history. If anyone in his family was ever involved in a cheating scandal, it is likely that he will cheat as well. So, stay away from him.
Second, interim monitoring, the ability to follow up on the financial status and performance of one's partner. One must be able to ensure that one's partner is in good standing and is not about to disappear.
Third, ex post monitoring. This is the most important, the ability to punish any breach of agreement by a partner. If your partner takes advantage of you, do you have an effective measure to deal with the situation, especially in the absence of fair and effective public rules such as laws? If not, do not enter into the partnership.
In relation-based systems, communications and agreements between private parties are informal and implicit, yet each party perfectly understands what is entailed by the communications and agreements. Naturally, due to their private and informal nature, relation-based agreements are difficult both to understand and to be verified by third parties. Thus, they usually cannot be enforced in a court of law, since the judges and juries have no way of verifying what contractual terms are conveyed by a pat on the shoulder or a handshake. With a mere pat on the shoulder, the boss tells his aide,
"Take care of him,"
and the aide perfectly understands what the boss is telling him.
"Get rid of him. If I am caught, don't implicate the boss, and the boss will take care of my family. If I implicate the boss, however, both me and my family will be in big trouble."
In contrast, rule-based communications and agreements are explicit and formal, and thus they can be verified by third parties. Although a rule-based transaction may require a complex set of legal documents, the terms of each transaction will tend to be similar, the documents and procedures will be standardized, and there will be common procedural formats. Why do Americans and Westerners tend to rely on rule-based governance, whereas Chinese and Asians rely on relation-based governance?
Because they have different governance environments. For instance, some people will use the law and lawyers to seek protection in cases of business disputes. And some will hire private parties to provide protection and to settle the disputes.
A country's governance environment determines the choice of governance mechanism by individuals and businesses. For example, when people believe the judges are fair, they tend to use public rules such as the court. If they feel that the legal system is corrupt, they will avoid it and use private relations, such as bribing or hiring thugs, to settle disputes.
What is interesting and important about the two types of governance environment is that they involve different social and business costs. For rule-based governance to work effectively and efficiently, a society must make investments to establish a large and complex political and legal infrastructure. This requires 3 branches of government, well-trained and independent judges, a huge professional army, and dedicated people who will enforce the law, to name but a few. The costs will be quite high. However, once established, whether this infrastructure is used in one case or in 1 million cases, the costs will always remain the same. So as the number of cases increases, the costs per use decreases. In economic terms, a rule-based system has high fixed costs but decreasing marginal, incremental, costs.
In contrast, a relation-based system involves low fixed costs. The parties rely on their private connections, not the public legal system, for protection. In fact, this system requires a minimal legal infrastructure. A well-connected businessman, as long as he is not robbed on the way to the bank, will be satisfied with this legal system, even though the judges may be corrupt and the police may be underfunded and dysfunctional. A relation-based system has few or low fixed costs, but rising incremental costs.
Why do the incremental costs of relation-based governance increase?
It is because as the business grows, the businessman must deal with strangers, and in relation-based societies, it is both difficult and costly to cultivate relationships with strangers. At the beginning of a relation-based business, the founder will ask his wife to serve as an unpaid accountant and will insist that his children work without pay. Of course, in such a situation, the monitoring costs will be quite low. But as the business grows, the founding businessperson will have to reach beyond his immediate family to hire more help. He will recruit relatives, friends, as well as neighbors from his hometown. In a relation-based business, the hiring of total strangers is a last resort because it is difficult to establish trust with strangers and to monitor them. This is why most successful businesses in Asia are family businesses. The following is the secret to the success of the Asian economies. They relied on a relation-based governance system, and they avoided the large upfront investment costs to establish a complete legal infrastructure. Historically, lucrative industries in Asia have been controlled by a small number of well-connected individuals and families.
In Japan, such well-connected individuals and firms are called zaibatsu, which means financial cliques. Zaibatsu refer to the big and highly diversified industrial and financial business conglomerates that dominated the major sectors of the Japanese economy from the Meiji period, beginning in 1868, until the end of World War II.
In South Korea, they are called chaebol, which literally indicates a clan that owns wealth or property. The chaebol is a South Korean style of a business conglomerate with the following characteristics. Typically, it is a holding company that owns numerous enterprises that operate globally. The head of the holding company, usually the head of the family that founded the conglomerate, controls all operations. There are several dozen such chaebols in South Korea. It is commonly believed that there is widespread informal collusion among the chaebols. They maintain their close relationships through marriages and through industrial associations, such as the Federation of Korean Industry.
In Indonesia, big conglomerates owned by prominent families, such as the Suharto family, were so dominant that Indonesians used the expression "it's all in the family" as a political joke. Why did some foreign investors believe they had cultivated good relationships, but in the end they still failed to protect their investments in a relation-based society?
Although each case is different, a common mistake is that they do not have an effective ex-post measure. They were still outsiders when they thought they were insiders. That is why they could not effectively deter opportunistic behavior. The relation-based way of doing business raises a number of important questions.
Is the relation-based way of doing business more efficient than the rule-based way of doing business?
This depends on both the scope and scale of the business. When the market is small, namely, when family members work together and sell their products to friends, relation-based businesses can be very efficient because they are able to avoid the fixed costs of supporting a huge and complex legal infrastructure. Furthermore, the monitoring of family members and friends is relatively inexpensive. But when the market expands, firms must hire tens of thousands of workers and sell beyond the founder's hometown in national and international markets. It is at this point that there are no longer cost advantages to relation-based way of doing business. As the chart shows, before the turning point, the relation-based way of doing business is more efficient. But as the market expands beyond the turning point, the rule-based way of doing business becomes more efficient, forcing relation-based businesses to change into rule-based businesses. So, relation-based governance will eventually self-destruct by facilitating market development.
Is the relation-based way of doing business legal?
Not really. Using private relations for governance and protection requires circumventing public rules. It is extra-legal, even illegal.
Will it disappear?
When a market expands, the marginal, incremental costs of a relation-based business will increase, eventually rendering it inefficient and unable to compete with firms in rule-based systems. Imagine a firm that relies on a relation-based business to sell its products to 10,000 global companies. The CEO will have to play golf with the CEO of every single client firm to cultivate relations. Thus, he will have to play golf for some 300 years. The rapid expansion of relation-based economies has motivated them to embrace more rules. Many are at different stages of making a transition to become more rule-based. However, the transition will encounter strong resistance from people who are deeply vested in the relation-based system. A prolonged and possibly unsuccessful transition will create a governance vacuum whereby old relations are no longer important, but the new rules are not yet effective.
The transition from relation-based governance to rule-based governance is especially beneficial for foreign investors. But Beware, foreign investors, beware. Such a transition can be extremely chaotic and dangerous. The old relations are falling apart, but the new rules are mere ink on paper, creating a governance vacuum. The transition from relations to rules is not as smooth as outsiders would like to believe. They regard the introduction of new rules as a source of protection for their investments. But insiders regard such transition as state of flux created by a governance vacuum. Thus, outsiders see an opportunity to invest, whereas insiders see an opportunity to loot.
Coming back to our puzzles. Puzzle 1. When dining together, why do Chinese compete to pay the tab, but Americans ask for separate checks?
In a relation-based society such as that in China, people tend to deal only with their friends. Taking turns to pay for group meals by people in a relation-based system becomes a bonding activity. If someone never picks up the check, well, he will be tossed out. In a rule-based country such as that in America, business is conducted at arm's length and people are dealing with strangers all the time. Keeping separate checks is the most efficient way of doing business.
Puzzle 2. Why don't strangers greet each other in China?
In a relation-based society, people form closely knit groups both for their livelihood and for their protection. If someone does not belong to a closely knit group, he must be a bad person, a cheat or someone who is disloyal, and thus he should be avoided at all costs. A relation-based culture frowns upon people who are overly friendly to strangers. Thus, if a stranger greets someone, the latter will think that the stranger wants to take advantage of him, so he should ignore him.
Puzzle 3. Why does China use both the traffic police and automatic traffic lights to direct the traffic?
Directions by the police are relation-based. Directions by automatic traffic lights are rule-based. Directions by both the police and traffic lights represent a confusing and complex transition. If China continues to rely on the police, then it will never become rule-based, but if it immediately switches to using traffic lights, the people will ignore them. So, in order to introduce rules, China relies on both traffic lights and the police. But by using both of them simultaneously creates confusion. This is the state of governance in China and other transition economies.
Let's review the main points. Asians, especially Chinese, rely on private relationships to govern business transactions because the law is not equitably enforced. The costs and benefits of relation-based governance depend on the scope and scale of market exchanges. Effective relation-based governance relies on effective ex-post measures to deter opportunistic behavior. In a relation-based society, as the market expands, the system will gradually lose its cost advantages and will have to transition to a rule-based system in order to remain competitive.
Many aspects of human behavior are difficult to explain, but with the right tools and persistence, we are able to discover meaningful patterns of behavior. We hope that this video has presented some thought-provoking ideas that will help to explain cultural differences that initially may seem to be totally bizarre. But culture does not operate in a vacuum, it is shaped by the governance environment in the society. Thank you for watching.